Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. We've got something very special for you today. We're going to go back to April 2018 for one of our scariest 2-hour Dogman specials ever. And later this afternoon, we're going to be bringing back the Easter Bigfoot story by request. Someone requested it in the comments, so look out for the Easter Hide Behind sometime this afternoon, noon or 1. I'm going to try and get it out by. And now let's jump straight in to the 2-hour Dogman special.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
The Inscrutable Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Madeline Starr. I used to be a high-powered young business executive. I used to hire, fire, and own people twice my age. Every trivial decision of mine used to affect hundreds of people's lives. But that's all changed now, because of Dogman. Let me tell you the story. One day I was heading to a meeting where I was going to force a smaller company to accept being swallowed up by my company, just so I could fire everyone who worked there and put them out of business. Don't think that I enjoyed doing things like that. In fact, don't think that I enjoyed anything. I didn't enjoy having to keep under the speed limit. I didn't enjoy other cars who dared to be on my highway while I was driving there. I didn't enjoy the bad phone reception out here in the boonies, where this stupid company was located. I didn't enjoy the inattentiveness of my employee on the other end of the phone. He is also the one who would never get my coffee order right. I really could have fired him, but I would yell at him and berate him instead. I found that I felt better after making him cry. That was the closest to enjoying anything that I supposed I felt back then. No, I was not a nice person. Nobody who thinks they're better than everyone else is a nice person. So really, by that definition, there are very few nice people in the world at all. And being mean doesn't necessarily bring success, as I've met plenty of mean losers whose businesses I've ruined. I was an internet millionaire when I was 16, and the first company I bought was the one my father worked at, just so I could fire him. I had an amazing 10-year run, turning my web money into a fortune in stocks and bonds, and a collection of companies producing everything from software to literal hardware, hammers and nails. It was an insane life, but I thought of all the rest of you as inferior. I made $1 million by the time I was 16. Most of the rest of you seemed like you'd never get there. I felt like the world was one big video game where I had all the cheats, and you were all non-player characters. Then I got taught a lesson by Dogman. What happened was this. I was driving to the meeting, like I said, and yelling at my subordinate over the phone, so I didn't notice the large creature standing in the middle of the road until it was almost too late. The next few seconds of my life played out in slow motion. First, I remember the utter shock of seeing anything standing in the middle of this lonely highway. That had never happened to me before. The other part of the shock, though, was that I was not able to assess what the creature actually was in the second I saw it. I took in the details, but my mind made no connection with anything it was previously familiar with. Let me tell you what I remember seeing. It was tall, as large as a man, but it was more tall in a football player way than a basketball player way. I mean American football. This guy was like a linebacker. That was the first impression I had. But as you've already guessed by now, this linebacker had the head of a dog on his shoulders, not the head of a man. I had vague memories of seeing that Egyptian god with the dog head. I think he's called Anubis. I saw him on some science fiction TV show that one of my ex-boyfriends used to watch. This did not look like that. This seemed to be a muscular human covered in light gray hair or fur. It had a dog snout, but not a long one like Anubis. Its fur was mostly straight but curly in places. It was relatively short hair, but long enough to blow a bit in the wind as I swerved to the left, narrowly missing it. The creature never moved and never flinched. I must have come within inches of hitting it with my front fender. Yet it made no effort at all to get out of the way and never seemed alarmed in the slightest. I, on the other hand, was in full-on freak mode. Once I avoided hitting the thing, I realized I was now heading for a bank of trees on the other side of the highway. I swerved insanely to my right, trying to keep the car on the road and failing. I remember the vehicle literally flying off the end of the highway over a sharp embankment and then straight headlong into a massive tree. The tree, like the dogman, didn't flinch. I could see in front of me because my airbag had inflated a split second after my head hit the windshield, and reasoned that I had a cut on my forehead. I was running the names of law firms through my mind that I could hire to sue the car manufacturer regarding the failure of the airbag. I was remarkably calm now that the accident had happened. I figured the engine must be wrapped around or embedded in the tree in front of us. Maybe the car might explode. Maybe I should try to get out. I tried to remember how to move and failed. Maybe I wasn't calm. Maybe I was in shock. I wanted to sleep. The best course of action would be sleep, I told myself. It would make perfect sense to sleep in this situation. That's what anyone would do. I suppose it was the loss of blood talking to me. Maybe I was about to die. I saw it then, walking over to observe the wreck. It was not a man. It was a muscular dog walking on two legs. And it wasn't a male dog either. As she got closer, I could see that she was definitely female. Her chest and belly were that of a female dog. She glared at me with utter hatred. Vin, you know how they say that when you're about to die, your entire life flashes in front of you? Well, that's exactly what her glare caused to happen. Only this time I wasn't seeing it from my point of view. I was seeing it from the point of view of my parents, of my schoolmates, of the people in the businesses I had ruthlessly stomped on. I saw how I looked to my employees who I yelled at. I realized I had been given great gifts, and I had only used them to hurt people. The wolf woman shone hatred at me through her yellow-orange eyes. I felt bathed in her loathing. This is what I deserved. This was how everybody looked at me behind my back. The hatred emanating from that monster was what I had really earned in this life. The money, the fancy cars, the employees to shout at, none of those were my karmic payment. This was. What would the dog woman do? Would she eat me alive? Would she wait for the explosion, then eat me later? Or was I not even good enough for that? Was she a natural creature, or was this how she caught her prey? Or was she some sort of divine messenger from heaven, or maybe from the other place? I wept. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't weeping for myself. I was weeping for my misdeeds. I was weeping for those I had hurt. I was weeping for the unnecessary pain I had brought into this world. It took me being injured and dying, losing blood and in shock, for me to finally see the world in a way that made any sense at all. Life is a relay race. You're only in it for a short while, and your job is to pass the baton. Your job is not to attain personal glory. It's to accomplish things that make it a little easier for the person you hand off your baton to. I had hogged my baton. I had used my baton for myself and lorded it over others. I had been given gifts to enable me to pass the baton on faster than almost anyone ever. Yet I had dawdled with it and used it to make the lives of everyone else a little bit harder. I gazed back at the lady dogman standing there. I nodded my head in thanks to her. She had done more good in causing this accident than I had done with my entire life. I nodded my head and accepted whatever would happen next. And then, it was just the strangest thing. The werewolf creature stopped glaring at me. She looked at me with an expression that I could not then or now define. It was what I could only call inscrutable. That was a word my grandfather used to use, but this is the first time in my life I actually found it to be useful. I literally could not define the expression on the face of the female dogman. All I know is that I could tell she no longer hated me. Her look contained not pity, but a sort of acceptance of my apology, maybe. Like she knew what I was thinking. It was like she forgave me. I felt like now it was time to go, and I closed my eyes, never expecting to wake up. But I did. Wake up, that is, in a hospital. I don't have any idea how I got there. I was pretty messed up, and I was there for almost half a year. I still walk with a limp, and that was almost 3 years ago. I've divested myself of most of my business holdings, and the few companies I still owned are being run by the finest people available. All of them are people I had previously gotten fired. These days I get fewer glares of hatred than I used to. People find it harder to be angry at someone walking with a cane, maybe. Also, everyone who works for me for 2 years gets stock in the company, so we all co-own these companies together. No good worker hired by me will ever have to worry about themselves or their family ever again, as we have full medical, dental, and other benefits. We have pension plans in place, we have child care staff, and so on. We prosper because everybody knows they are valued, and they know that they are respected. Could I have become a millionaire at age 16 if I had been this way from the start? I honestly don't know. But I know it's the only way I can live now. So I've read that there is a lot of discussion about whether Dogman is natural or paranormal, about whether it's from outer space or in our imagination, or good or evil or whatever. I would have to say that I don't think the Dogman or dog woman that I encountered was evil. I deserved everything that happened to me. Even though I have a limp, I traded a good leg for a good life. I appreciate everything and everyone now. As for paranormal, I would vote yes. I don't think this was just an animal. When I thought I was dying, that creature's expressions seemed to indicate that it knew exactly what I was thinking. Then again, I had lost a lot of blood, so maybe I imagined that part. Maybe the Dogman species really is a normal, natural animal. Maybe it's so stupid, it doesn't know enough to get out of the way of oncoming traffic. But that's not what I sensed. I sensed great intelligence, and I sensed great fury or anger. I didn't sense evil, but I did sense karma or justice. I could be completely wrong, and maybe I was just delirious at the time. But I think the Dogman is either supernatural, or maybe some sort of nature spirit or even a god form. I think they are here to mete out justice. It's just that if we've led wicked lives, justice is not always going to be on our side. And neither is Dogman.
Scared Off by Werewolves, as told to Peter Bernard. Read by PQ Ribber. So when I was a kid, we had a crazy aunt named Crazy Aunt Dottie. We used to call her Dottie Aunt Crazy behind her back. She wore thick glasses that made her eyes look giant. She couldn't hear too well, and her attention span was fairly short. Oh, and the thing about Aunt Dottie that earned her the cruel nickname Crazy. Aunt Dottie was convinced that the land around her property was haunted by werewolves. Dottie's house was the only inhabited one on her block, which was carved out of an old-growth forest. She told us that when she and her late husband moved in, when she was a 20-year-old bride, this was going to be the first block in a proposed new neighborhood. Houses only ended up being built on about half of the plots of this block, and all of them had clearly been abandoned long before I was born. I remember a historic moment when we asked Aunt Dottie where all the other people on the block had gone. "Oh, the werewolves scared them all off," she replied innocently, and we all had to stifle laughter. Remember I said it was a historic moment? That's because this became a running joke in my family from then on. Where's the TV guide? The werewolves scared it off. Have you seen the car keys? Nope. The werewolves scared them off. And so on. So, now you think we were cruel. We never said any of this to her face. Then, one day, in 2008, Aunt Dottie died. I was stunned to discover she was 95 years old. Apparently, Aunt Dottie had lived in that house since 1933 and had been alone since my late Uncle Grant died in the mid-50s. She got Social Security and lived mostly off that. My sister estimated what the property would be worth, which was not really that much. We still figured to make a bit of a profit off selling the place, so we were eager to do so at the earliest possible moment. The trouble was, the few local realtors were all entirely uninterested in even listing the places for sale, and none of them would explain why. I could guess why. It was the stupid myth that the place was infested with werewolves, imagine, infested with movie monsters in the 21st century. So finally, an idea dawned on me to use the then relatively new website called YouTube to try to correct this situation. I decided to spend the night in the house with my trusty old VHS camera and prove that there were no werewolves in the location so that I could sell the place and buy myself a bag of nacho cheese-flavored Doritos. Simple, right? Except, of course, didn't work out as planned. I got to the place and set up my camera on a tripod, facing out the back window. Okay, mistake number one. This camera had no night vision. I had no idea what I was doing. About the only things I could see in the video were occasional bugs flying close to the lens or else reflections of me from inside the house. Since I didn't think the video was going to prove or disprove anything to anybody, I started recording myself monologuing cheerily about how fun it was there in the house and how there were no werewolves here. That's when I was interrupted by the sound of dogs. Howling. Actually, I wasn't sure they were dogs. It might have been coyotes or even wolves. They were right in the woods, after all. To be honest, I would prefer to come upon a pack of coyotes or wolves than a pack of stray dogs. Former house pets who have gone feral are the most frightening creatures in the world, with the possible exception of the things that were making those terrible sounds outside my late aunt's house that night. They weren't the howls of dogs, coyotes, or wolves. You know what was outside that house, and I knew it too? It was a terrifying sound, and I immediately wanted to get out of there. But I had come this far, and besides, there's no such thing as a werewolf. I just had to wait till this pack of dogs moved on. Then the rest of the night would be peaceful, and I'd be able to videotape something and sell this place. Patience is a virtue, I told myself. And so I sat there, camera off, waiting for the dogs to stop their racket outside. And so, of course, they just went on and on and on and on, and they sounded closer, closer and closer. Catching a flash out of the corner of my right eye, I turned quickly to see the most terrifying thing I ever saw in my life. This was a man standing outside the window, staring at me with wild eyes. He was unclothed and covered in fur. He had ears that I at first took to be like elf ears or Spock ears, but when he shifted weight on his strange bull-like legs, I could see his ears were on top, like those of a bull or a deer or a dog. He appeared to be mentally challenged as his tongue hung down out of his mouth, panting and drooling. His eyes, though, were intense and alert. I heard a growling sound and watched as this man-thing curled his lip up and bore his fangs at me. Those teeth looked like they were used to tearing flesh off living creatures. There was only one thin sheet of glass between me and this monster, and I understood all at once that Aunt Dottie wasn't crazy at all. I realized with crushing weight how pompous and cruel we all were, assuming we knew better than our brave old aunt. She lived here for 7 decades. Who could do that? I promised myself that if I lived till the morning, I would never come back there again. The dog-headed man-creature showed me the claws on its front paws, which were shaped much like human hands. He laid the claws gently against the glass, then drew them down the pane, leaving 4 evenly spaced scratches on the window. He was marking this house as his turf. I was intruding on his turf. I guess this monster thing was the only real estate person in the area who mattered. I turned on the camera, and the creature moved away from the window so quickly I wasn't sure which direction he had headed in. By the time the image came on, he was long gone. So there I was, informed that I was on a monster's turf, but if I were to leave the house to try to get in my car and go, I'd be exposing myself to getting eaten by the big bad wolf. What would you do? Probably the same thing I did, which was to lock myself up in my aunt's room on the 2nd floor. The rest of the night, I tried to sleep, but I could hear them outside, moving around, racing around. It seemed to me that every time I was about to fall asleep, one of them would hit into the house hard and wake me back up again. I remember hearing a scratching sound on the outside of the house, and I sat up in terror. Was one of them climbing the outside of the house? Was it climbing up to the 2nd floor to get me? I heard nothing more for a few minutes and began to calm down when I heard it again. I watched the window intently from the bed, too afraid to get up and look out. But eventually morning came, and I got up the nerve to look outside. It looked like nothing happened. In the morning light, it felt like maybe nothing really had. Going downstairs, the scratches on the window were still there, and the previous night-long nightmare was proven to have definitely happened. I got in my car and drove out of there, grateful to be alive and never to have to return. We gave up any hope of selling the property and left it for the Dogman. Peter Bernard asked me if I think what I saw was a natural animal or something evil and supernatural. All I know for sure is this. Dogman is an annoying SOB, and he cost my family a whole bunch of money. I photographed a Dogman outside my window, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. If your kid tells you they are seeing a big hairy Dogman monster lurking around your property, don't laugh her off like I did. You should take what kids say seriously, no matter how wild their imaginations are, because once in a while, the boogeyman is real. I got a promotion at my job last year, so I moved myself, my wife, and our 12-year-old daughter out to a lovely house in an affluent suburb. This was my dream, and my wife's as well, but our daughter was a city girl, and she was dead set against the move. She protested, she cried, she got her friends to protest and cry, but all she succeeded in doing was annoying me and my wife, who were sure we knew what was best. We were soon corrected by Dogman. So like I said, my daughter, let's call her Anita, which is not her real name, was furiously angry about us moving to our own home from our cramped city apartment. My wife expected her to change her mind when she saw how large her new room was going to be, but I figured it would take longer for her to get used to it if she ever did. My shrink warned me she might be creating false dramas to prove we don't belong in the house, like perhaps poltergeist or other apparently paranormal phenomena. So, when Anita came running into the house one night screaming about a fox-headed monster man, I could barely contain my smirky grin. I mansplained to her that fox-headed men don't exist except on TV shows. My wife lectured her about how raising one's voice is not ladylike. Entirely frustrated with our unwillingness to hear her explain what had just traumatized her, Anita ran to her spacious new room, crying and in utter misery. I told you it would take longer, I smirked out at my wife, who had to agree I was right about our daughter. But was I? Anita changed drastically after that. She lost her confidence and was constantly looking over her shoulder. She made us move her bed to the wall furthest from her window, yet still ran screaming into our room every night just after midnight. It was always the same reason: the fox-headed monster man. Days wore on into weeks, wore on into months, and Anita's condition grew worse. She had lost weight. She hadn't made any friends at her new school, and one of her teachers had called us in to ask us what was wrong with her. She was distracted in class and kept to herself in an unhealthy manner. The only girl who would talk to her at all told the teacher that Anita says her parents think she's crazy, so she's afraid to talk to anyone. The teacher wanted to know why we thought Anita was crazy, and of course we both denied thinking she was crazy. I implied she must be crazy to think that we thought she was crazy. I mean, the idea itself was crazy. But we knew what the problem was. It was the fox-headed monster man who our daughter felt she was being terrorized by. The very same fox-headed monster man that we were afraid to tell the teacher about, lest she think that we were crazy too. "Is it the fox-headed man?" the teacher asked, and we both gasped, unwittingly answering her question in the process. She informed us that while some children have imaginary friends, others have imaginary boogeymen. There are, she said, various ways that families cope with such an occurrence, but the only one she, as a state employee, was allowed to tell us about was psychiatric counseling for all three of us. We agreed on the spot that we would move immediately to get ourselves into family counseling for Anita's sake, and the teacher went on to urge us to take Anita's stress more seriously. First, this enraged me. I accused the teacher of wanting us to humor our daughter and keep her in an imaginary childish fantasy land forever. That lady stood up, as tall as she could, and did her best to look me straight in the eye before she responded that my daughter was going through stress and trauma, whether the cause was external or internal. In either case, showing empathy and rallying around her in her time of need might help lift her out of this period. That made sense to me, as much as I still hated the idea of pretending that there was a man with a fox head scaring my daughter. So, that night, my wife and I hedged and hemmed and hawed and spoke about everything else over dinner, except telling our daughter that we were looking into therapy. My wife said we should just make the plans and let her figure it out once we were in the office. So it was an uncomfortable night, and I felt strangely guilty keeping a secret like that from Anita. It wasn't exactly hiding her birthday present from her or telling her that the Easter Bunny was real, after all. After dinner, Anita usually cleans up while we watch TV, but that night we told her she could go watch TV and we'd clean up for her. This relieved a bit of my guilt, and my spirits were beginning to lighten, when suddenly Anita screamed in the living room and the dish I was drying slipped out of my hand, smashing into a million pieces on the floor. I felt so angry at that moment. It wasn't the plate, which I could easily replace. It wasn't my nerves, which were now jangling like guitar strings. It was the utter frustration of once again knowing exactly what the problem was going to turn out to be: the stupid fox-headed monster man. Gritting my teeth in fury, I took a step toward the living room to tell my daughter to quiet down, but my wife stood in the way. She urged me to take a picture outside the window of the monster to show Anita I was on her side. Calming down, I agreed to humor my daughter and allow her to stay in this immature fantasy land even longer. Against my better judgment, I entered the room, trying to look concerned about monsters, and futzed with my phone to get the camera app working. Anita was holding on the left side of the couch, peeking over the top to look in fear to my right. I asked where the monster was, and Anita pointed at the window across from her. Dashing in front of the window, I snapped off a shot before looking, and to my amazement, what I captured was this. What I saw on my phone. I looked at the window finally and saw the creature run off too quickly for me to get another shot. As you can see, it is a photo of the face of an actual dogman. I understand why Anita described it as having a fox's head, because the fur is kind of reddish, and look how it's different around the eyes. The nose is not really visible in this shot, but Anita says it turns up at the end much like a fox's nose sometimes might seem to do. The ears on top stand on end like a fox's as well. Brought my daughter upstairs, and we three slept together that night with no further interruptions by monsters or anything else. I got online and booked us an extended stay back in our old neighborhood in the city. In the morning, we wearily packed what we would need into the car and never looked back at that house ever again. I'm not going to tell you where it is because I'm still trying to sell it. If the Dogman photo was identified with that area, it would kill the real estate market over there, and I know at least one realtor would have my head on a platter. Anita told us that the creature was around my height, and that's the height he would have to be for his face to be where it was in that window when I took that shot. Since the creature wasn't 10 or 12 feet tall, it's not impossible this was a sicko in a costume trying to scare my daughter for whatever creepy reason. I personally saw it with my own eyes, only as it was moving away. The only view I ever got of its face is the photo itself. According to Anita, whose word is now respected in our home, the monster was entirely covered in reddish hair or fur. The tip of its nose was like a black dog's nose, but its fangs were longer than a dog's and more like a lion or tiger's teeth. It had hands instead of paws and would tap its nails on her window at night to wake her up. Then she would look at the window and it would go from a curious expression to baring its teeth in a sick-looking grin. She was convinced it was not a man in a costume. Anita has no doubt in the world that she was being stalked by a monster and that its intentions for her were not good. The fact that this didn't seem to matter to my wife and myself was the cause of her mental exhaustion. But she's back in her old neighborhood now, back with her friends in the neighborhood and school. It's like a light that had been switched off was switched back on. These days, Anita's starting to think we're too concerned with her safety as she is about to enter her teen years. That's okay with me. I'm proud of her regaining her confidence and her sense of independence. That's not an easy thing for a 12-year-old girl to do after she's been stalked for months by a man-sized, sharp-clawed, grinning, fox-headed dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
Dogman of my dreams, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. When the conversation turns to cryptids, as it often does in my group of friends, sometimes the discussion centers on the debate as to whether Dogman is a natural creature or perhaps some kind of extra-dimensional or paranormal entity. I feel strongly that this is not a natural animal, and unlike the others, my feelings are not based on theories or things I've read in books. My deep convictions on this subject stem from my direct and terrifying experience of the very supernatural aspects of Dogman. My true story of Dogman begins with a sad and traumatic event for my family, the divorce of my parents. They had grown up together, gone to the same schools, dated each other since they were teens, and then gotten married and raised me and my two sisters. We had a peaceful home, and my parents kept their quarrels private from the rest of us. That's why we were all so surprised when, after my youngest sister had moved out, that they announced their impending separation. Mom was to keep the house, while Dad had already rented a small bungalow about half a mile away. Even in separation, they were still a 15-minute walk from each other. Dad's new place was straight down Forest Lane, which is exactly that. A skinny strip of tar stretching through the forest, and then the second house to the right on Meadow Avenue, down the block, and across the street from the apartment I was renting. At least I would get exercise visiting my parents. My sisters and I were all glad Mom kept the home we grew up in, where all our childhood memories were still stored in closets in the attic. The three of us tried to deal with these changes as well as our parents obviously were, but we all took it pretty hard. I know that I, for one, started having very bad nightmares. This was not like a sleep paralysis episode or a lucid dream or any of those possibly paranormal kinds of things. This was just a really bad, incredibly terrifying kind of nightmare that seemed absolutely real while it was happening. I would have it every single night, and I would wake up drenched in so much sweat that I needed to take a shower, dry off, and change into new bedclothes at 3 a.m. every single night. It got so that I prepared 2 sets of things to wear before going to sleep each night. I grew increasingly exhausted and distracted each ensuing day. Now that you know how badly this dream tore at my daily life, let me tell you what happened in it. I was at my father's new home, which in the dream looked like the interior of my apartment for some reason. Light shone in the windows so brightly that it was making my eyes get blinded. When it came time to leave, I went outside, and it was now very dark out and extremely cold. I notice I'm underdressed for the weather, and I turn to go back inside. My father has already closed the door behind me. I notice my old VW Beetle parked in front of Dad's place. I decide to use that to drive to Mom's house, basically because I had a heater in there. I get inside, start the engine, and am soon warmed up. I only have to drive maybe 150 or 200 feet to get to Forest Lane, then make a left and drive the half a mile to my mother's place. I don't slow down to make my left because there's never any traffic there that time of night, but as I make that turn, a large, dark shadow flies out of the bushes to my right, and I swerve to avoid hitting it, skidding off the road and directly into a tree. My engine is wrapped around the tree as I see a young deer race past me. That's what I almost hit, a deer. I see smoke coming out of my engine, and I realize I better get out of that car quickly before it blows. I'm lucky in that the car door still works, and I find myself outside of the vehicle just as the reason the deer was running explodes from the forest. It was a giant. It was a giant, horrible man. A hairy man, an angry man, a savage animal man. It has an animal head like a dog, but not any dog I'd ever seen. It was a giant, hairy, ferocious monster. Logically, I think I have to protect my mother from this thing, and I take off running the half-mile to her home. This is prey behavior, running from a predator. The monster bear dog man notices my behavior and decides I'm more interesting than the deer. The huge monster begins running after me, but deliberately not fast enough to catch up. He runs after me just quickly enough that I'll tire out and make myself even easier prey to catch. And I do exactly what the monster wants me to do. I run as hard as I can. I have no choice. I have to protect my mother. The monster is going to kill my mother. But each time I look over my shoulder, I see the immense creature toying with me, staying just close enough that I can see it, and just far enough to give me the inane idea that I could actually escape it. By the time my mother's house is in sight, the house I grew up in, the symbol of my childhood, I can barely stand. My legs are shaking underneath me. I have to take frequent rests, and I'm sweating profusely. The animal closes in, and I know my time on Earth is now ended. As the creature tears into me, I'm consumed with pain and wake up screaming. Now, repeat that same exact dream every single night, and you'll find yourself a nervous wreck pretty soon. For the next month, if I were visiting either of my parents, I walked. I was that put off by my repeating nightmare that I didn't want to risk actually recreating the dream. I didn't want to be in a car, and I didn't want to be making that left, and I didn't want to give a deer or a dog man a chance to do the things they did in my dream. Not saying I actually believed in Dogman's existence back then, but I was exhausted, and the dream had me rattled. So one night, I was at my father's while my mother called him on the phone. I wasn't really following the conversation, but when he got off, he handed me his car keys. I asked what was going on. He said my mother wanted to borrow the car, and he told her I'd drive it over to her. I hadn't told anyone in my family about my nightmares, so my father had no way of knowing that I wouldn't want to drive the car over to Mom. I briefly considered telling him my situation, but there was no way I could get out of doing a favor for my mother because I had a bad dream. So I took the keys and went outside. His car was parked in a different spot than mine was in the dream. Besides, my dream was about my car, not his. Already this was different, I told myself internally. No reason to be nervous. That didn't stop me from being nervous. The sense of déjà vu was so overwhelming. It was almost like another person in this story. I had to turn the key in the ignition twice because my sweaty fingertips slipped off the first time. I discovered I was shaking all over. Contemplating how to proceed, I reasoned with myself that there were two basic choices. First, I could take the turn as slowly as possible, ready to stop the car at any moment that anything ran out on the highway, or I could gun the engine and try to get past that nightmare corner as quickly as I could so that I could stop shaking all over and just deliver the car to my mom. I chose the latter. I decided I would watch my right as I took the turn. The animals always ran out from the right each night in my dream. As long as my attention was directed there, I would be able to see anything emerging from the forest in plenty of time to avoid hitting it. My plan was foolproof. Gunning the engine, I skidded into the sharp left turn, eyeing the woods intently as the vehicle swerved left. The sudden impact with the deer that had just run out of the forest to my left sent the car into a spin. I hadn't been looking to my left. They never came out of the left side in my dreams, not ever. But this deer had. And now my car was skidding backward into a tree. Slamming on the brakes, I managed to arrest the car's motion just in time to avoid slamming the trunk into a tree larger than the one in my dream. The car was now stopped, and I was now turned around, facing back towards my father's house. And I saw it emerge from the forest, from where the deer had come. It was the nightmare creature. It was the dogman I had dreamed of since my parents broke up, but somehow even larger than in the dreams. It was a dinosaur version of a dogman. It was prehistoric and on steroids. It was a nightmare that caused my nightmare to put its tail between its legs and run. I saw this monster that was the living embodiment of horror pounce out onto the road, chasing the deer, and get distracted by my car's lights, and by me. This 10-foot-tall hulking parody of the human form took a step toward me and stood under the light of the moon, so I could see it properly for the first time. This was a nasty beast, with alternately matted or missing fur, pieces torn out of its long pointed ears, open cuts and festering scabs all over. The growl it made had a deeper and stronger vibration than the engine of the car I was driving. It looked as though it could pick the car up and tear it in two. I felt the same overwhelming need I had always felt in my nightmares. I had to get to my mother and protect her. I remembered how each time in the dream I would try to do this, and I would fall. I swear that what happened next was that a voice whispered in my ear saying, "You can't save your mother. You can only save yourself." I knew what I had to do. Before the creature could take another step in my direction, I floored the gas pedal and aimed the steering wheel directly at the massive beast. It was a gamble, because I knew that if I hit this dogman, it would probably impact the car more severely than it impacted the monster. Still, I gave it all the gas it had and aimed directly toward the monster of my nightmare, the monster I was fated to meet. My entire life had led up to this point. And the monster moved. It moved out of the way. I hadn't crashed. But I was about to. Turning the wheel frantically, I skidded onto my father's block and parked in front of his place, all in the same movement. Well, I essentially parked in front of my dad's, although it was at a 3/4 angle and faced in the wrong direction. All I cared was that I had arrested its movement long enough to get out of the vehicle and race up the stairs to bang on his door. I was convinced the creature was chasing me and hadn't yet checked to see if that was the case. When I could finally hear my father cursing and complaining and coming to the door to let me in, I finally took the chance of looking back. There was nothing there. No monster. No deer. No anything. So I stayed at my father's that night, making some excuse that I got run into by deer and the road was too slippery to drive or something. I called Mom and promised to bring her the car first thing after the sun came up, and then we all went to sleep. The car had some dents from the deer hitting one of the back doors, and I ended up paying for them to be fixed out of a sense of guilt. Somehow, I felt It was my fault that the deer hit me. I had so many warnings. I should have been better prepared. This all happened 7 years ago, and my father's been gone 3 years now. But I have never shared the Dogman part of this story with anyone else before. Not my mom, not my family, not anyone. I never saw the monster again, and I never had that nightmare again. Since then, I've made new friends who are very into cryptid stories and cryptozoological reports. We talk about the Dogman nearly every day, and I've never even told those guys this story before, but like I said earlier, when we do discuss this particular cryptid, I am always on the side of those arguing that Dogman is most definitely and without any question a very evil and a very paranormal demon from out of a nightmare, and nothing will ever convince me otherwise. The end.
Get your Bigfoot for President t-shirts, mugs, buttons. Get them now. cafepress.com/Bigfoot for President.
Rock-throwing Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. Eagle O tells us the following. I was out camping with my ex-girlfriend in the Pine Ridge campgrounds, which is north of Gettysburg and south of Harrisburg. This is prime Bigfoot area. They even have the white Bigfoot over there. That's how squatchy it is. So me and my girl, let's call her Lindsay, both knew we should keep an eye out for our forest brothers. So anyway, we set up our camp and lit a fire, and we were cooking some beans or something for dinner. Lindsay kept telling me to cut it out, and I kept asking her, cut what out? And she just kept saying, cut it out. She kept acting more and more annoyed, which got me more and more annoyed because I didn't know what she was going on about or why she was upset. I was confronting her and angrily demanding she tell me what the problem was when, bam, something hit me hard on the side of my head by my temple. Lindsay said, I didn't do it, which I already knew since she was standing a foot in front of me. Whoever threw that rock had to be standing to my left. Looking in that direction, I saw nobody was there, just trees and bushes over there. Then my heart sank as it dawned on me. If something in the Pine Ridge area is standing in the woods and throwing rocks, chances are it's Sasquatch. Under my breath, as quietly as I could, I whispered to Lindsay, It's Bigfoot. Let's pack up quietly. But before I could finish my sentence, Lindsay was screaming, Sasquatch, Sasquatch, and running straight toward where the rock came from. I called after her once, then realized she wasn't coming back. She wanted to see a Bigfoot, and for all I knew, she was about to. I grabbed my more valuable possessions and threw sand on the fire. I was going to get out of there no matter what Lindsay did. After I got my stuff packed up, I packed up her stuff, then dismantled our tent and packed that up as well. Still no Lindsay. I couldn't just drive off and leave her, but I really didn't want to walk through those woods looking for her either. I was completely unarmed, which was stupid of me. Don't go wandering around the Pennsylvania mountains unarmed. That's monster country. I tried to force myself to go into the woods and look for Lindsay, but my body wouldn't budge. I felt tears running down my cheeks. How much longer could I give her? Should I be notifying the authorities already? Maybe she was lost, or hurt, or worse. Finally, taking all my courage and using it up in one moment, I got up and began marching toward the forest. I had to at least look in, at least call her name. I had to at least try to find her. It was hard to see as I was crying so hard, or my eyes were crying, but my heart was brave. When I got to about 8 or 10 feet in front of the wood line, there came a sudden noise from directly in front of me, and I fell to the ground ready to be trampled on by a Sasquatch. But it was not a Sasquatch who came barreling out of the trees. It was my ex-girlfriend. Sitting up, I laughed in relief as she jumped over me and ran away, and she just kept running. I wondered why, and I found out. Crashing out of the woods behind her was the strangest thing I had ever seen. It was tall, taller than any man I'd ever seen. It was hairy, hairiest creature in the woods. It was angry. I never saw an animal that angry before, unless it was a man who didn't want me dating his daughter. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking that I saw a Sasquatch. But you're wrong. I never saw a Sasquatch. The thing I saw had a dog's head. Its legs were all wrong, too. They bent backwards where they were supposed to bend forward. They looked like some kind of nightmare monster legs. I was just laying there on the dirt, observing the thing as it ran past me, or almost did. As it was about to leave my field of vision, it noticed me there. Choosing to give up its pursuit of my girlfriend, the huge beast turned toward me instead. I scrambled to my feet to run, and the thing roared at me. I took off running, desperately, insanely, as fast as I could. Behind me, I heard the monster chasing me, and to my right, I heard the car starting. My car. My girl, who I had waited for, was not waiting for me. She was leaving without me, leaving me here for this dog man to have his way with. This did not make me happy. Filled with adrenaline, I made a beeline, not back to our camp, but forward to the road out of the campground that I knew Lindsay was going to have to drive my car down. Somehow, I made it to the road just before the car reached that area and waved my arms to stop. I could see that she saw me. I could see also that she was not stopping. I literally had nothing to lose, so I just lay down in the road. Let her run me down. It would be more merciful than anything the dog man had planned. Fortunately, she stopped the car and I scrambled around to the driver's side, pulling the door open and looking this heartless person directly in her eyes. Either you slide over, or I'm pulling you out of this car, Grand Theft Auto style, I warned her. And she scooted over to the passenger side, knocking a bunch of my stuff over in the process. The next few seconds played out in slow motion. I had one foot in the car and I saw the dog man exiting the forest. He was heading directly for my door. I hit the gas with my right foot as I pulled my left foot into the vehicle. The car lurched forward, heading diagonally across the road, heading toward the embankment on the side. The dog man grabbed my car door by the handle. Fully in the car, but with the door wide open and the dog man holding on, my ex-girlfriend screamed in my ear. She was just a bundle of help that night. I floored the gas, and the wolf creature was pulled off its feet. I could only drive so fast on that country road. It's not exactly a highway, but I went as fast as I could, and I swerved left and right. The dog man held on tight. If I didn't get him off the door handle before I had to stop the car, he was going to be able to reach in and grab me. I made a crazy decision. I drove directly at this large tree to the left of the road. It was very close to the side of the dirt path, and my plan was to try to basically scrape the wolf man off the side of the car using that tree. Fortunately for all three of us, it never came to that. The dog man let go rather than smash into the tree, and we drove off to safety. I didn't close that door for another quarter mile or more, but it didn't matter. The danger was over. And so was my relationship with that girl that we're calling Lindsay. I don't think I have to explain why I broke up with her. I think you can tell me why I did now that you've heard the story. The thing about this story that took me weeks to realize is that we had rocks thrown at us. Then we saw a dogman emerge from the woods. So many times people have stones thrown in their direction, and the general accepted belief is that this is Bigfoot doing it to scare you off his hunting ground, or maybe where it's raising its young. My ex-girlfriend and I are living proof that sometimes the creatures throwing stones in the forest are not Sasquatches at all. Sometimes the things throwing rocks in the woods are Dogman. Thanks, Eaglo. That is a very interesting and unique story. Not completely unique, though. As you'll learn from this next Dogman encounter, I'll read to you right after this.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279.
A stone's throw in New Jersey. Dear Scary Stories, I'm originally from the Pacific Northwest, famous for being the home of Patty the Sasquatch from the famous Patterson-Gimlin film. I'm in my 60s now, but when I was young, I would hike and camp a lot, and I had my share of encounters with hairy ape men or women. I never saw one, but I heard their cries in the night, and I saw their footprints, and one time I even had tiny pebbles thrown at me while I was fishing. I knew what that meant, and I got out of there, leaving one of the fish I caught as a peace offering. I'm an 8th Cherokee, and I have always just accepted that these hairy people are just another tribe, different from ours, but just as human as we are. The story I have to tell today has nothing to do with Bigfoot, though. And it didn't take place in the Pacific Northwest. It took place in Vineland, New Jersey, or just outside of there, I'm not sure. I know what you're thinking. That's the home of the Jersey Devil. But this isn't a story about the Jersey Devil either. This is a story about Dogman. Okay, journey with me back to the mid-1990s in scenic New Jersey. I was on the East Coast visiting my first ever internet girlfriend. This was a new thing back then, and I was the first of my friends to have one. We had been close online friends for over half a year, and we were finally taking the risk of meeting each other in person. We decided I'd fly out, and then we'd both go camping together so that we'd be on sort of a neutral turf as we got to know each other in person. We were both hikers at the time, and it made up a lot of what we talked about online, so it seemed a natural way to proceed. We set up camp in a clearing we found in the middle of the woods, and I started a nice fire. We made dinner and told each other spooky stories. I told her about my Sasquatch encounters, or almost encounters, and she told me tall tales of the Jersey Devil. I was very curious about the devil, as I, at first, had assumed it was just another name for Bigfoot. I was wrong because she said the devil had the head of a horse and wings. It sounds more like some kind of flying kangaroo than it sounds like a Sasquatch. So she and I got looser and more comfortable with each other, and soon she brought out a small boom box and we started listening to tunes. That's when she said ouch and laughed that she'd just been hit by an acorn. I laughed until a few seconds later I was hit by one as well. Looking up, we expected to see a squirrel shaking tree branches or something, but the leaves all seemed calm and there were no animals above us that we could make out. When she got hit again, I saw it happen. The acorn did not come from above. It came from my left. It felt like a lightning bolt shot through me. She caught my expression and also noticed the direction she had been hit from. "Do you have Bigfoot around here?" I asked. "No, but we have stupid rednecks," she shouted into the forest. Nobody said anything in response. Realizing that this lady I had just met was acting far more brave than I was, I got my firearm from my bag and walked into the woods in the direction of the noise to see if I could chase off the teenagers or whoever was doing this. I swear to you, I parted a bush, saw what was doing it, turned around, and left. You would have too if you had seen what I saw. First, I saw its belly. Its hairy belly. I saw that first because that's what was eye level to me. I looked up from there, and I saw its chest, as big as a large man's chest, but covered in fur. I craned my neck back and looked almost directly up. I saw the face of a monster looking directly back at me. This was not the face of any animal that is supposed to live in New Jersey. This was not a Jersey Devil, and this was not a Bigfoot. This was not a person in a costume unless the costume had animatronic ears that twitched on top of its head. There was no mask back in those days that had a long, wolf-like snout filled with teeth like a Jinsu knife set and a long drooling tongue hanging out the front of it. The eyes of this thing were not human eyes. They seemed to almost glow in the dark light. This was a werewolf. This was a creature from the horror movies. It had to be twice my size, and it was standing inches from me. It smelled like the zoo. I was trying to take a step backward, but I found my knees had grown very weak, and it took all my effort to keep from collapsing right then and there. I realized I had dropped my gun in surprise, but it didn't matter anyway. I would be like a pea shooter to this thing. The creature emitted a low growl and glared at me. Slowly, I saw it reach out with its right arm, moving the arm over my head at my own eye height, so probably 5 feet above me. Plunk. An acorn bounced off my head. The dogman dropped an acorn onto me. Plink, plink, plink. He dropped 3 more. Bending down, the creature literally got in my face. My legs regained their strength and I began to back away just as the monster screamed. Like I said before, I turned around and left. The girl saw me leaving and came with me. We both beat a hasty retreat. She never asked me why I was crying, and she never asked me what I saw. I don't think she wanted to know. That was the last time I saw that lady, although we've become friends again recently on Minds. She's trying to get me to join some online gaming thing. It's good to hear from her again, but it dredged up all these memories that I just related to you. I suppose the dogman could have killed me if he wanted to. It could have killed both of us, but it didn't. So why do I feel that it was evil? I'm not sure, but I know that thing is not a normal natural animal. I could tell, somehow, that it was not from the same world as we are. So why did it let me live? Maybe so I would tell the story. Maybe a thing like that lives off our fear. Maybe those kind of monsters only kill when people stop being scared of them to start the process all over again. Maybe it's some sort of evil thought form that manifests as an upright, walking, canine monster. Maybe it prowls lonely places because humans caught alone in the wilderness are so easily frightened. I felt that night like the more frightened I got, the happier the monster was. Maybe I was feeding him. Maybe the dog man was harvesting my fear.
And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend, we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all-new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Training Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. I wish that I could call this story Spring Training Sasquatch or Spring Training Skunk Ape, but the truth is I never saw anything in my life that looked like a Bigfoot. Instead, I will call it the much less catchy Spring Training Dogman, because back in the 1970s, when I was a baseball player, I saw a hairy man with a wolf's head over near the Mayaka swamps. In fact, I almost didn't live to tell the tale. Okay, like I said, this was the 1970s. I was 19, and it was my first experience of being out on my own, separate from my parents. I had been drafted by a certain major league team and received an invitation to spring training on the west coast of Florida. It was the most exciting time of my life, getting to hang with guys whose careers I'd been following through the newspapers for years. That's not to say they were all nice to me, because for the most part, they weren't. There was a lot of hazing of new guys back then, and it was either kept from the press or at least kept out of it. I see these modern sports interviewer people on television asking modern players if the older guys are giving them good advice and sage counsel. In my day, you were lucky when they only said hurtful things to you and didn't physically gang up on you in one manner or another. I was a small guy, as most infielders were in those days, so it seemed really funny to the team captains to pick on me harder than the other guys. Still, I was away from my parents on a major league team and with some cash in my pocket, begging to get spent. I made friends with two of the younger guys, and we went out looking for, well, let's just say we went out looking for a good time. And we found it. Florida that spring was warm, but the young women were even warmer, especially if you were a ball player. Of course, it could take a few minutes to prove to some of the more skeptical ladies that you really were a professional ball player. We weren't famous guys. In fact, none of the three of us would ever actually make it to the majors during the regular season, for more than a cup of coffee. You couldn't just Google your sabermetric stats on your phone back then, if you know what I mean. My solution was that I carried 2 clippings from a local Florida newspaper. One had the box score on the day I hit a double, and the other was from the day when I walked twice and scored a run against the Yankees. Of course, it only had my last name and my first initial, but if I had my buddies with me, those would usually believe us. So anyway, I had never had a serious girlfriend before, and instead of playing the field like the other two, I sort of fell hard for this one girl, who we can call Carlita. That was not her name, but she was Cuban on her mother's side and very exotic looking to me, since I'd grown up in the Midwest. I thought she looked like a glamorous character from the Late Late movie on TV. I think she was a year or two older than I was, which added to her mystique and charm. Whatever she said, I believed. She seemed much smarter than I was, so I just listened to her. And one night, I listened to her that there was a place we could drive to in order to get some privacy and some alone time. Even though I wasn't with my parents, I was rooming with another player, and there wasn't a place I could bring a girl. Carlita lived with her large family in a home that was loud in every room at all times. So, when Carlita told me to drive out to the Miyaka Wild area, she didn't have to ask me twice. I've told this story a few times to a few friends over the years, and I was always a little uncertain about where exactly this all happened. I thought it was on the side of Route 72, which cuts through the swamp there, and I believe was the location of the famous Skunk Ape video from years after this story took place. A few years ago, I was visiting family in Florida and drove a bit out of my way to go look for locations that reminded me of where I was that night. Route 72 either has changed since the 1970s or else was not where we went that night. Here's what I remember. We drove on a paved highway, possibly Route 72, until we came to a dirt road. She told me to turn off my lights and go down this natural path. I wanted to pull over right away, but she told me that if I did, we might get hit from behind by the next car of young lovers. So I followed Carlita's way, as it were, and eventually we came into a clearing between these jungle trees. I was still new to Florida, so the palm trees covered in tiny, fast-moving lizards was not what I was used to yet. Carlita laughed at me that I was creeped out being in that place. There was nobody else there, as in not one person or vehicle. I was really regretting not stopping by the road. At least there our bodies might be discovered after the snakes poisoned us and the serial killers serial killed us. Carlita was trying to snuggle, but every single tiny noise outside made me jump and squeak out, "What was that?" like a frightened 2-year-old. For some reason, my girlfriend didn't find my cowardice to be a turn-on, so after I begged her for the 12th time to please let me turn on the headlights, she finally said okay. I think she called me an infant and told me to put on my nightlight, so really, the evening had been ruined completely by this point. I could see that she was angry at me, and I was awash in complicated emotions that were all new to me at the time. And then, in a second, none of that mattered anymore. I turned on the headlights, and then neither I nor Carlita had a single thing more to say. We just sat there, slack-jawed, wide-eyed, as the headlights of the car caught a monster in its bright, glaring view. Not more than 10 or 15 feet away from us, standing in the bush, directly in front of the car, stood the tallest man I had ever seen. It was the darkest creature I had ever seen, black, but not black like a black bear. This creature's fur didn't shine. It absorbed light. Maybe it was caked in dark mud from the swamps. This tall man was hiding his head from us with its muscular forearms and prehistoric, savage-looking hands. Don't ask me what I mean by that. I just remember a flash of feeling that those were not human hands, and those were not bear claws, but they were some sort of mix, larger than either. The creature took its hands from its face, glaring directly at me. It balled both massive hand claws into fists and raised them well over its head, which had tall, pointy ears. On top, like a dog or maybe a cat or a deer, but this was on a 2-legged, hairy monster in the swamp in Florida. So before I can understand what I'm looking at, this massive man-monster dog-ape thing slams both fists into the hood of my car, leaving dents in both places, and that giant boy leaned down right into the windshield, and he screamed. Carlita told me to kill the lights, so I did. Now I was completely blinded and couldn't see anything. I started to wonder if maybe I shouldn't automatically do everything Carlita told me to do anymore. I started the engine and was amazed when the engine turned over right away. I had been afraid that the creature might have wrecked the inside of my car as badly as he messed up its look. "Pull backward," ordered Carlita. Fed up, I hit the gas, moving forward. For those listening from the Humane Society, please note, no dogmen were injured during the making of this story. I saw it leap up on the hood and heard it run over the car and away behind us. Now I backed up quickly toward it, but it was already gone and off in the woods. Before Carlita could even order me to do so, I had gotten us back on whatever main road that was, and that's about all I remember about the incident. I think that was our last date or next to last. It's weird how something like that happening could kill you. It could get your name in the next David Paulides book, but when it doesn't, you can sort of just put it aside and get back to daily life. I mean, by the next afternoon, I was a lot more concerned with getting cut from the team than I was about a dogman in the swamps of Florida, so it becomes just a memory until we get older and look back over our entire life. We find that very few of the things that seemed so important back then still seem that way, and we find that a number of the incidents we shoved into the back of the closet and hid for fear of ridicule were perhaps the most important moments of all. This event was life-changing for me in so many ways. I became extremely particular about lovers' lanes after that, for one thing, and it taught me respect for nature for another, and it taught me the fear of Dogman.
1970s Pennsylvania Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by Nancy Levonian. This is the true story of the time I saw the Pennsylvania Dogman. I kind of feel like Dogman guards the perimeter of your life, whoever you are. When you're about to cross the line, Dogman will be there to scare you back to the turf you were meant to be on. To me, the Dogman represents the living embodiment of fear. And now I'm going to explain why. Back when I was growing up, back in the 1970s, my parents fell out of love with each other. Conservative dad didn't want me wearing pants, so mom decided she was a woman's liber and threw out all my dresses to spite him. They fought for a few years, then abruptly split up. In some divorces, the parents battle over custody of the child. In my case, they fought to try to get the other one to take me. My father insisted a girl belonged with her mother, and my mom somehow convinced herself that the modern thing to do would be to make my father raise me. My dad got custody of me, which he didn't want, and he left me with his extremely old, extremely conservative, and extremely religious great aunt, who we will call Clystine. So I went from my mom making me wear jeans to my great-great-aunt making me wear her old hand-me-down dresses every day. And I lost contact with all my friends as well. There were no cell phones back then. There was no internet, no computers, no social media. When you moved to a new area, you might as well have moved to Mars. I was basically marooned out in the country with Aunt Clystine in her house by the woods, and there were no other kids that I knew of anywhere. At first I hung around the house, helping her with the chores and learning how to sew. After a while, she encouraged me to go out and play, which I took to mean leave me alone for a while. I started walking in the forest, a little bit further in each day. One night over dinner, Aunt Clystine gave me a lecture about the woods. "You know those woods are haunted, don't you?" she asked. I gave her a dubious look and she laughed. Aunt Clystine was strict and old-fashioned, but she had a good sense of humor and the mood was always light around her. "You be careful walking out there during the day, and you never go there at night," she warned. "By day, the forest watches you and judges you. By night, it passes judgment and inflicts its ancient primeval justice." I didn't know exactly what that meant, but it sent chills through me. Soon after, I was wandering in the woods one day when I met a boy. We were both surprised to see each other there. He seemed more frightened of me than I was of him. He asked if I was a ghost. It seemed illogical for a girl in the 1970s to be out wandering in the forest wearing an old-fashioned dress. I was so embarrassed. I told him my aunt made me dress like that. I hadn't cared before when it was just me and her, but now his presence made me feel like a dork. Relieved that I was a dork and not a ghost, he began flattering me about how pretty I was and how he wouldn't want me to change a thing. I threw dirt in his face because I thought he was making fun of me, and soon we were both throwing dirt at each other and laughing. I had always been the ugly duckling until then. I think to some extent I had begun to blossom, but I also think this poor boy hadn't seen a girl his age in a while. Either way, we were both soon convinced that we were in love, and for me, it was the first time. Don't worry, I'm getting to the Dogman. I introduced the boy, who we will call the boy, to Aunt Clystine. She seemed to approve of him, but now she ordered both of us around. She at first made him wear a tie and bring a present when he visited, but she relaxed that fairly soon because she began to trust him. She taught us that we could be best friends for now, but anything other than that would have to wait till marriage. We considered other plans because our hormones were going wild. We were at that age and there was no talking sense to us. Soon, we decided to meet in the forest at night when Aunt Clystine was asleep, and we were going to let nature take its course. And so it was that we met in what was a romantic waterfall during the daylight hours. Somehow, being here at night and hearing an owl hooting and crickets chirping made the beautiful waterfall seem kind of dark, mysterious, and creepy. But the more frightened I got, the tighter the boy held me, and soon the only thing that mattered was that I was with him. Until we heard the crashing sound from the bushes behind us and to our right. We both gasped and instinctively ducked down to hide from whatever was coming toward us. We heard it breathing and we instantly knew it had to be something large. I tried to imagine what it might be. A bear? Maybe a wild pig or a deer? I had no idea, and didn't have to wait long to find out. The creature walked, on its hind legs mind you, right out of the bushes, smelling everything around it with its twitchy nose on the end of its long snout. It was a large dog, but it was standing up. The boy laughed and stood up too, calling the dog over. "Here, boy! You sure scared us. Come here, boy!" But the dog didn't come to him. Instead, it looked at him and kept breathing heavily. The smile left the boy's face, and we all just existed there for a moment, looking at each other. The more I saw, the less it looked like a dog to me, and the more it looked like a very tall man. Its arms were at its side, not in front like a dog's arms. And then its face turned angry. It bared its teeth and I heard it begin to growl. I fell to my knees and prayed, which was the main survival skill my great-aunt had taught me. I prayed to God, swearing that if he let me survive this, I would save myself for marriage and never take a risk like this again. The boy didn't pray, though. The boy got angry. "Don't you growl at me, you mongrel!" He raised his hand as though he were going to slap the dog when the strangest thing happened. The dog stood up. Further. We thought it was standing up before, but really wasn't. At its full height, it was impossibly tall. Probably twice our height or even more. And its legs were massive, like a professional wrestler's legs. This was no dog. This was a dog man. And the dog man leaned down toward us and barked out the most horrific sound I'd ever heard in my life. We ran. We both ran, but in different directions. I ran to my Aunt Clystine, and I assumed the boy ran home. The entire way I could hear the beast behind me, and I was crying and getting cut by thorns and branches as I struggled to get inside before the dog man caught up to me. As I reached Aunt Clystine's house, she was standing out back, armed for bear hunting. I ran faster than I'd ever run, directly at my great aunt. She, in turn, leveled the firearm in my direction and yelled, "Down!" My knees buckled and I hit the dirt hard as Aunt Clystine fired over me and behind me. I heard the creature howl. It crashed back into the woods and was gone. Aunt Clystine carried me inside. I was cut all over and weeping hysterically, but not really that hurt. We stayed up all night sewing and drinking tea, and we never discussed that incident ever again. Instead, my aunt sent me to college, and I got a job and happily married a business acquaintance. We have a son who is now grown and works out in California in show business. And in a very large sense, I owe my happy life not just to my Aunt Clystine, but also to the Dogman, guardian of the places we should not go.
I'd like to take a moment to say that if you have a scary story you'd like to tell us here, you can write Peter at peterbernard.com, or you can call our new Scary Stories hotline number and leave it to us in the form of a voicemail message. It's easy to remember. 804-LESCARY. That's 804-LESCARY, or 804-537-2279. The St. Patrick's Day Dogman is told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. When I was in my early 20s, I got married to a legend tripper. This young woman knew about as much about weird world history as she did about hiking and camping, so we both developed careers that allowed us to work from the road, and off we went on one adventure after another. Little did we know that our light-hearted curiosity would lead to a St. Patrick's Day encounter with an infamous dogman werewolf from Irish history, an encounter that we almost didn't survive. Here's what happened. My wife, let's call her Gwen, decided that since we were in England, long story, we should check out Wales. In particular, she was interested in the legend of Bad King Vereticus. She said her grandmother was Welsh and had told her when she was a kid that King Vereticus had been transformed into a werewolf by St. Patrick as punishment for being a bad dude of one sort or another. Gwen made plans for us to take a tour of Gwydir Castle, then venture south from there to an area in Gwydir Forest Park where we would camp out on the night of St. Patrick's Day and scout around for the Werewolf King. Yes, I know, I've got a weird wife, and no, you can't borrow her. So the forest park is hardly a forest park at all by American standards. I find it hard to believe that the large black dogs and black cats that people report in the forests of England could possibly exist here. There's not enough land, and it's also close to civilization. People say Bigfoot lives there in England. Where is there space for such a creature? What does he eat? My wife and I had looked into cryptid reports from England in depth, and I'll be honest, we were just camping there for fun. Neither of us expected to see King Vereticus, the Werewolf King, because we knew that it was just a fable, and we knew werewolves don't exist. So that's why, when the full moon cast the silhouette of the dogman on the side of our tent that night, we were almost as shocked as when we heard the creature howl. Gwen insisted it had to be a joke, some kids playing a prank on us. I asked her if she was so sure. Why was she whispering? Firearms are not allowed in England, so I knew that if this were a real creature, we were in bad shape. I made a mental note that if we survived this, we would only camp in areas where I could properly protect myself. There was nothing we could do except quietly put our boots on and get ready to bolt out of there the first time it seemed safe. It felt like we were sitting there for hours, but it was probably just a few minutes. We hadn't heard whoever it was walking or howling for a while, so we both agreed that it was time to make a run for the car park and get out of there.
My wife had decided this was a lunatic celebrating King Veredicus's memory by acting like a jerkass. She warned me that this guy might be dangerous. He might really think he's a monster. I thanked her for the warning. So we agreed on the path we would take, breaking right immediately upon leaving the tent, running down the dirt path to the open field. From then on, we should be safe, unless whoever it was really wanted to attack us out in the open. After all, if nobody was around, then out in the open would be as private a place to victimize us as any other. Plus, we'd have to pace ourselves. It took 15 or 20 minutes to reach this spot, and we were not going to be able to do that all in one sprint. Bam! We exited the tent like a trained SWAT team, and bam, we weren't 50 or 60 feet from the tent when we saw it, standing there, directly in the middle of the path, in front of us, blocking our way. It was not a kid. Gwen started crying to my side as she realized that. It was an immense monster, but it was not a Bigfoot or Sasquatch kind of a monster. No, it was a monster like a werewolf. It was bad King Veredicus, and he looked hungry. This thing had to be 12 feet tall. It was ridiculous. When it screamed, we just fell back on our butts like something from a slapstick comedy. This was not how I wanted to go. I wanted a serious, dramatic, sad exit. I didn't want to be the butt of a Dogman joke. And then, nothing. As in, the Dogman disappeared. It didn't blink out. It sort of disintegrated into the air. Or a good word might be to say it looked like it was dissolved into the air itself. Was it really gone? Had it just become invisible? We didn't stick around to find out. The only thing I know for sure is that, unless this was some Penn and Teller level magician doing an act in the middle of the forest, we weren't being pranked. Occam's razor would point to this being an encounter with some sort of real, or at least supernatural entity. It seemed to be physically there, then it dissolved into the air like powdered sugar in water. We both are still convinced, to this day, that what we saw had to do with King Veredicus and St. Patrick turning him into an enchanted wolf. My advice to you, if you're looking to camp in Gwydir Castle, would be this. Don't camp there on St. Patrick's Day. Or if you do, bring some extra food for the resident Dogman.
Do you have a scary story you want us to read on the show? Just call our voicemail hotline, 804-LIST-SCARY. That's 804-537-2279. And now for something completely scary.
St. Patrick's Day, Leprechauns and Dogman, as told to Peter Bernard, read by PQ Ribber. I recently learned from my grandson that Rheingold beer is back in business and popular among the kids in his hipster Brooklyn neighborhood. I started to tell him a story about a St. Patrick's Day from long ago before Rheingold was hip, when it was brewed in Bushwick, Brooklyn. My grandson rolled his eyes and pretended to be getting a phone call so that he didn't hear my story, the little twerp. If only he'd listened just one sentence more, he'd have found out that this isn't just any old man's story about beer and St. Patrick's Day. No, this is a story about beer, St. Patrick's Day, and Dogman. Sure, you'll be asking me what Dogman has to do with St. Patrick's Day, and you'll be wondering if perhaps I might have meant leprechauns instead of the Dogman. But don't you worry, this story has some leprechauns in it too, at least according to my buddy Seamus. Let me start at the beginning. Okay, it was 1969, because the Mets had just, no, wait a minute. The Mets had just won the World Series, and this was March. So it must have been March of 1970. My boss and some more prestigious coworkers were planning a big bash for St. Patrick's Day up in the northern part of New York State. I'd never been up there before, as I'd heard it was all Yankee fans living in those parts, and it probably wouldn't be safe for someone like me to visit. It's not so much like this anymore, but in those days, we former Brooklyn Dodgers fans felt an obligation to root for the Mets as the inheritor of the mantle of the underdog team in New York City. They were marketed as being the team for the regular working man, and the beer that sponsored the Mets was the locally brewed Rheingold beer. My beer, in those days, truly was Rheingold beer. So much so that I got a job at their plant in Bushwick and had been working there for 10 years. I was pretty friendly with some of the higher-ups since I'd been there so long. One of them is the guy who donated his home for the party, a really upscale mansion designed for entertaining. My boss told me that me and Seamus could get in if we drove the beer truck there from Brooklyn. The party was up near Buffalo, so that's a 7-hour drive each way if the traffic gods are merciful. We certainly would be earning our invitations. Okay, so this was 1970. We thought of ourselves as very sophisticated at the time, but looking back on it, there are some ways in which we were kind of primitive. For one thing, we were only beginning to realize how dumb it was to drive a motor vehicle while intoxicated. Actually, I'm not going to blame the times, and I definitely don't want anyone to think that's the way my coworkers would act. But Seamus and I were idiots. We were drinking from the truck on the trip up, and our reasoning was that we only drank while the other guy drove. Since we traded places every 90 minutes or so, this brilliant plan meant that no matter who drove, they would always be at least a little drunk. I forget how many hours into the drive it was, but apparently I had passed out in the passenger seat. Seamus was shaking me and telling me I had to drive. I really didn't want to get up, and I tried to stay in my dream, but it evaporated, and soon I couldn't even remember what it was about. I looked out the window, and I saw we were parked by a road sign for Burma Shave, or was it Tropicana orange juice? It was an advertising sign, maybe some kind of cola, I forget. I had to get out of the cab to walk around and get in the driver's side, and when the cooler night air hit me, I realized nature was calling and walked directly over to a patch of trees for a little privacy. Wait, colder? Night air? How could it be night? We left at 9 a.m. and this was a 7-hour drive. I wanted to run back and start interrogating Seamus, but I was sort of committed to the whole nature's call thing, so I had to finish that first before going back to the truck. As I walked toward the trees, I got a weird sense that I was being watched. I didn't hear anything strange and I didn't see anything moving, yet I still felt like I was being watched from those woods. So I did the only logical thing. I walked away from there and relieved my suffering on the back of the Burma Shave sign. At least I think it was Burma Shave. This was a long time ago. I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on my back the entire time. When I got back into the truck, Seamus was snoring in the passenger seat. I shook him, but only sort of got him somewhat awake. He kept yammering that he'd seen leprechauns running back and forth on the road, and that they kept making him get lost. I asked him where we were, and he just giggled kind of crazy and told me to ask the leprechauns. That creeped me out completely. So I just let him go back to sleep and started driving. Once I started seeing road signs, I'd figure out where we were and where we needed to be. Then I'd have to call the boss and make some excuse for why Seamus got us lost while I slept on the job. That was not going to be a fun phone call, but it wasn't my problem yet, because first I had to figure out where we even were. It was kind of surprising, the total lack of road signs on this stretch of black tar we were driving on. It seemed like we'd been driving 10 or 20 minutes already, and I'd not seen a single sign along the road, not even a milestone or anything. just a forest as far as the eyes could see on both sides, and the stars and moon joining with our headlights to guide us. Then I saw it, on the right side of the road. It was the Burma Shave sign. I pulled off and parked in front of it, bursting out of the cab and running around to look at it more closely. It sure looked like the same sign. My gaze fell to the road, and I saw recent tire marks where we had parked earlier. I raced around to the back of the sign, and there it was, still fresh, where I had gone just 10 or 20 minutes earlier. And then that strange feeling returned, the feeling from the woods behind me. I turned suddenly, expecting to see someone there, but all I saw was trees. I was certain I wasn't alone. I looked around at the forest. I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I decided to look lower. What if Seamus really was seeing leprechauns? I saw nothing, but I knew I was still being watched. Insanely, I took one step toward the woods when I heard a low growling. Now we had a standoff. I was afraid to move forward, and someone or something was standing just behind those bushes and trees in front of me, and it was growling. I had to know what it was. I took another step forward, and the growling got louder. Leaves and branches moved and swayed, not down low where a short creature would be, and not at eye level to me either. These branches I saw swaying were above my head. If that was a leprechaun coming out of those woods, it was the tallest leprechaun in history. I actually wanted to take another step forward. My curiosity was so great. This time, however, my knees would not cooperate, and I found myself sitting down on the grass instead. It didn't matter, as whatever it was in the woods had decided already to come all the way out, and I was going to see it in all its glory if I could just keep from blacking out a few moments longer. So I want to point out that when werewolves are in movies, they usually are shown as man-size and savage, but fast and somewhat thin by monster standards. That is not what emerged from these woods. This thing was a slow-moving, incredibly wide, sickeningly tall, hair-covered monster with a face that was sort of a mix between a man's face and a dog's face. It had 2 dog ears, but the rest of the face was an abomination. If it wasn't part human, it must have been part ape or chimp, maybe? It sniffed the air, and I wondered for a second if it might be part wild pig. Its nose wasn't exactly a dog nose or a pig nose or a human nose. If I had to describe it in a few words, I would say dog-headed ape man, but that head was not actually like any sort of dog I've ever seen or would ever hope to see. I was convinced that this was the end, and little black bugs flew around the edges of my vision. I could tell I was blacking out when suddenly someone was pulling me up from behind. It was Seamus trying to save me. I gasped for air and did my best to help him get me in the cab. Then he ran around to the driver's seat, and I could see them. All of them. The huge, slow-moving, incredibly wide and muscular dogman walked slowly toward the car with a dazed, robot-like expression on its face. The creature was now surrounded with very short, very pale people. The leprechauns, Seamus informed me. I looked at them, and they didn't look like leprechauns to me. They were short, yes, but they had no red beards, and they wore no clothes. Or maybe they were all wearing matching leotards? It was hard to say in the dark. Their eyes seemed slanted and dark. They were too large for their faces, but not cartoonishly large like the space aliens they show on TV. None of them had a single hair upon his head, and they all surrounded our truck, watching us. A giant dogman and a bunch of tiny men with dark eyes just surrounding us. Seamus started laughing again. Tears ran down both our faces. I wondered what would happen next, and the Dogman suddenly screamed. We woke up the next morning, laying on the grass outside the estate of our rich co-worker throwing the party. We had each other's socks on, and our shoes were on the wrong feet. Neither of us had any memory of undressing or redressing, and to this day we have no explanation for that. But we made it in time for St. Patrick's Day, and nobody really noticed or cared that we were 12 or 16 hours late with the delivery. Nobody ever asked us anything about it, and we all had a great time that St. Patrick's Day. I got married later that year and quit the beer plant to go work with my father-in-law's company, which is where I worked on through the 1980s. To this day, I avoid upstate New York. Their Bigfoot sightings are legendary, of course. I'm not afraid of that. What I'm afraid of are the magical creatures who seem to be interdimensional and seem to be a huge part of the Dogman mystery. I think that entire area is opening into a kind of reality I never want to encounter ever again. I think that area is a doorway to the reality of the Dogman.
I felt sorry for myself because I had no doorman. But then I met a man who had no scary stories, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot paraphernalia. Did you know you could be wearing a psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot t-shirt right now? They come in white, black colors, long sleeve, short sleeve, little baby red sleeve, wife beater size, pregnant wife size. Plus, you can own a scary story, psychic Bigfoot versus savage Bigfoot hat, hoodie, journal, postcards, wall decals. All this can be yours right now by going to cafepress.com/scarystories NYC. Link is in the description. And now, get ready for an all-new, completely uncensored, slightly bloody, and absolutely terrifying new Dogman story. Oh, wait. YouTube won't allow me to tell you stories like that on this channel. If you want to hear that, you're going to have to go to peterbernard.com and sign up for our paid subscribers club. You can choose any price you can afford for a 1-month subscription, and then every weekend we tell you a story YouTube would never allow us to tell you on this channel. See you this Sunday for an all new, very scary, completely uncensored Dogman story.
Come back for more scary stories.